The program Under the Same Sky by Sollazzo Ensemble is designed to showcase the wide range of musical and poetic genres that define the culture of late medieval Europe. It brings to the fore very different styles and languages, from the Latin of liturgical formularies to the French and Italian vernaculars of love poems. The richness of this program is matched by the rich musical forces employed. 19 musicians divided between singers and instrumentalists, an unusually great number of performers for a concert of late medieval music. As the artistic director Anna Danilevskaia explained me, the involvement of such a large group of musicians is intended to bring on the stage a variety of different characters. Different performers lend their voices to different poetic situations, defined by diverging emotional states, in order to explore the endless variety of human experience. You can see in the program that the concert is arranged in 5 thematic groups, namely power and politics, love and obsession, ecstasy and faith, hunts and games, and finally morals and values. These themes certainly do not exhaust the subjects treated in late medieval music, but they do aim at showcasing its richness, countering simplifying views of medieval music as homogeneously churchy, so to speak. Furthermore, the program and the performance aim at highlighting the relations between a medieval culture of musical emotionality and the functions and emotions that we ascribe to music nowadays. It is to these resonances between past and present that the title Under the Same Sky refers. After all, the people who created, performed, and listened to this music lived under the same sky that stands above us today. Thinking of the human emotions encapsulated in centuries-old music can help us connecting with the listening experience in a more intimate way. It goes without saying, however, that a 600-year-old emotional culture is not the same as ours. The study of the history of emotions has taught us that we should not assume that people in the past felt just like we do nowadays. Even emotions like love or hate were defined by cultural paradigms that differ much from those according to which we act nowadays. The love of a 14th century poet is not the love of a 21st century poet. And yet, the emotional trip on which Sollazzo invites us is entirely legitimate from an artistic and aesthetic point of view. The role of musicians is to bring music to life here and now, inducing the emotional response of contemporary listeners. Sollazzo's emotional quest is authentic not in the sense that it recreates a lost culture of musical emotionality, which is after all really lost forever, but in the sense that it starts from the traces of past emotions in order to infuse new life in music by retracing and reviving its bonds with our own emotional world. Thus, historically informed performance practice and actualized expressivity can coexist and work together, treating music composed hundreds of years ago as tokens of an emotional communication between humans rather than as dusty pieces in a museum. In this introduction, I'd like to lead you through the main themes that frame the concert, while offering you some historical insights into the music performed. Let's begin with the first thematic core, power and politics. Late medieval music could serve political objectives in a variety of ways, by voicing straightforward political messages or by representing in sound the power of the ruling class. Poetic and musical styles, thus, were chosen to match the function fulfilled by music. This is the case, for example, of Eia Dulcis by Johannes Tapissier. This Latin motet, composed around 1400, consists in a prayer to the Virgin to end the schism that divided the Western Church into 2 and then 3 papacies, Rome, Avignon, and Pisa. To give voice to such an important message, Tapissier chose the highest musical form of his time, namely the polytextual isorhythmic motet, in which the 2 upper voices sing at the same time 2 different Latin texts, and the entire composition is organized according to very complex rhythmic patterns that reveal a mathematical and speculative understanding of musical time. The grandeur and solemnity of this musical form was chosen also by Johannes Cicogna to praise his patron Francesco Zabarella in the motet Ut te per omnes. Zabarella was a lawyer and a scholar based in Padua, and he would later become Bishop of Florence. In Cicogna's polytextual motet, one of the upper voices celebrates Francesco Zabarella, while the other praise his patron saint, Saint Francis, in a mixture of power and religion that is characteristic of the culture of the time. Late medieval music did not only sing about power and religion. Love is a major theme, a state of things that resonates well with our own contemporary musical culture. I read recently that 70% of the songs that made it to the charts in the US market between 1960s and 2010 are about love, 70%. So I invite you to read the text of Hélas Avril, a virelai by Matteo da Perugia, an Italian composer who is known to have been the very first chapel master of Milan Cathedral in the very early 15th century, when the cathedral was, in fact, still under construction. Albeit working for a church institution, Matteo authored both Italian and French secular songs, such as, for instance, the above-mentioned Hélas Avril. This complex composition thematizes in a very powerful way the contrast between outer and inner world, an emotional tension we all experienced at least once in our life. The beauty of nature being reborn in springtime contrasts sharply with the inner reality of the poetic eye, who is left with memories of love, regrets, and tears. The thematic core on ecstasy and faith gives space to different sorts of religious music, characterized by different but heightened forms of expressivity. Memento Mei is probably the most peculiar form of polyphony you will ever hear. It is an example of sequence, a form of polyvocal performance of plainchant that was practiced in 15th century Milan and results to very strong dissonances. This sort of music was improvised, and we know about it only because the theorist and composer Franchino Gaffurio described it in one of his treatises. Note that Gaffurio disapproved the sequence and remarked that it was sung by people ignorant of the art of music because it was too dissonant. Yet, Gaffurio was evidently fascinated by this practice, and he explained in detail how it functioned, so that it is possible to reconstruct it nowadays, and you will hear one such reconstruction by the Sollazzo Ensemble. Gaffurio explained also that the sequence was sung in the liturgy of the martyrs and in the Requiem Masses because of its mournful character, which lamented the shedding of the blood of the holy martyrs and the judgment of the dead. Thus, the sequence performance of Memento Mei can be seen as a form of extreme musical expression, which was lost in the following developments of Western music. Hearing it nowadays makes us wonder which other sorts of music were silenced and are now lost forever. Forms of passionate devotion also lay at the core of the Laude repertory, religious songs that were particularly common in late medieval Italy. You will hear an example of Lauda with Maddalena degna da laudare, which appears in a 13th century manuscript that belonged to a brotherhood in Cortona, a town in the hills of Tuscany. The Lauda often employs an affective language that was intended to draw the listeners into a state of passionate devotion. Furthermore, the Laude engaged the listeners and performers also through their characteristic musical form. They often take the form of a ballata, a dance song with a choral refrain. We know that actual dances could accompany the performance of Laude, thus drawing the faithful into religious practices that rested on a tight relation between music and body. Late medieval music does not give voice only to religious devotion. Music is also fun, and many compositions take a playful approach, as it happens, for example, in the two 14th century cacce, Così pensoso and In forma quasi. The caccia, literally hunt, is a musical form that consists of a canon between two upper voices, so that the two upper voices appear to chase each other. To this canon, a third lower voice is added. We tend to regard canonic compositions as serious and austere genres, just like some of the fugues of Johann Sebastian Bach, for example. The 14th century caccia, instead, was a gay and playful genre, with texts depicting hunting, fishing, market scenes, so that the canon gives the impression of dialogues and quick exchanges between different speakers. In the Caccia in Forma Quasi by the 14th century monk Vincenzo da Rimini, the poetic eye is trying to sleep, but is disturbed first by a storm and then by the cries of the vendors who try to sell any sort of things. Just like any other sort of medieval text, the Caccia can be interpreted allegorically, but it always has a playful touch, often with erotic overtones. The last thematic core of Sollazzo's concert is devoted to morals and values, and it reminds us how different ideas of what is right and what is wrong could coexist in medieval societies. Music could be harnessed to express very different worldviews. In Paolo da Firenze's ballata Perché Vendetta, the poetic eye vows that, and I'm quoting, "Since taking revenge is not possible now, I await the moment in which I can take it on him or her." End of quote. This is set to an extremely florid writing, almost a medieval precursor of the revenge aria of the opera seria. Even in a deeply Christian society like late medieval Italy, revenge, that is, responding to an offense with another offense, was culturally acceptable and it was even legally recognized. And yet no one would have denied the validity of Christ's command to turn the other cheek. In a musical representation of such moral multiplicity, Sollazzo contrasts Paolo da Firenze's revenge ballata with a 14th century Benedicamus, which invites the listeners to praise and thank the Lord in a calm and non-reciprocal acceptance. Just like the Benedicamus ended Christian liturgies, it will end Sollazzo's concert, letting us wondering about all the people who 600 or 700 years ago were moved by the very same music that moves us today.